In basically all forms of video games, movement speed and abilities are king. Being faster than your opponents will always be an upside, allowing you to get to points faster or just generally make it harder for your opponents to hit you. In the cat and mouse game that is Dead by Daylight, movement speed is one of the biggest factor in how chases go. With no powers, the difference between a chase with a 110 killer like Hag or Huntress versus a 115 killer like Trapper or Artist is like night and day, despite there only being a 5% movement speed difference. This is where Haste comes into play. Haste is extremely simple, it's what's written on the label. You move faster. Now see, back in my days, Haste was a very limited resource with only a few instances coming to mind like Hope, No One Escapes Death, or Play With Your Food. However, in the modern era of Dead by Daylight, Haste is becoming incredibly commonplace and it is making the game much more annoying for both sides. This also applies to the opposite effect Hindered too, but that effect is much more rare, though I still will talk about it. Now, there are what I believe to be two types of haste, risky haste and free haste. Let me explain. Risky haste usually takes a risk or difficult requirement to activate and then you get haste, while free haste is, as you expect it to be, well, free or incredibly easy to attain. For risky haste, I'd have to say it's something like machine learning or Play With Your Food. For machine learning, you have to not only read a giant wall of text to understand what the perk does, but also lose a generator to gain haste for 30 seconds. Or for Play With Your Food, you have to find a survivor and basically never chase that one survivor and slowly build up 3 stacks, and then once you have 3 stacks, you only get 3 attacks out of it before all your stacks are gone and you lose your haste, and then you have to repeat the entire process all over again to gain your stacks back. Free haste, on the other hand, would be perks like Hope or a lot of killer add-ons like, say, Huntress's new haste add-ons. You're already going to be getting a lot of hatchet hits, so why do you need haste? It doesn't even fit her kit or anything, but I'll get to this later. Hope, I know, will be controversial for me to say, but in the endgame, you're already in a winning state, you're already at the advantage, but now you're moving at 107% movement speed permanently until you escape? It's massive. It's already rewarding a winning state of the game and basically makes you impossible to catch unless the killer has a movement speed ability, which is why I'd say it's free haste. Sure, you could make the argument that the requirement is you have to complete all 5 generators and, survive, but that's already the incentive to do, right? You're already incentivized to finish all 5 generators and escape. It's not like you have to do any sort of requirement or any sort of secondary action to gain it. You're already winning, you complete all 5 generators, now you're moving at 107% haste for free. It's not like BFF for Legion where you have to stack your ability and make sure that you can get it by endgame. No, it's just you get haste for winning. Another very recent example that might change is on the Dungeons & Dragons PTB with this magic item. Anytime Vecna uses the Mage Hand ability, the survivor just gains 7% haste for 3 seconds for doing nothing. Mage Hand is already a really bad power on one of the longest cooldowns in the game, then they add a magic item that punishes him further for using his ability. Like, it doesn't make sense. Why is he getting punished for using his ability? Another one that really baffles me is the Refined Serum add-on. What this add-on does is makes it so that you can consume your medkit and gain 5% haste for 16 seconds. All with the push of a button, you gain haste for free. However, what really irritates me with this add-on is that for some reason, this add-on can be used 24/7 around the clock whenever a survivor wants to, but the Blighted Serum add-on, which is really bad, like an F tier add-on on 90% of the roster, can only be used 3 weeks out of the entire year only during the Halloween event. Like, why? I genuinely don't see any reason why this trash add-on needs to be limited, but this amazing haste add-on can just be used whenever a survivor wants. It doesn't make sense. Though the biggest problem with haste is, like I said before, how common it's becoming. It feels like every other patch a new form of haste gets added to the game. Shadowborn, Skull Merchant, Knight, Huntress, Vecna items, etc, etc. Haste is an extremely, arguably the strongest status effect in the entirety of Dead by Daylight because doing anything faster is a good buff, but making the most important part of Dead by Daylight, the chases, even stronger for one side is playing with fire. Though the topic of what gets haste is debatable because there are times where I believe haste is warranted. Like for the Trapper and Knight, when they are using their power, they are standing still for a long period of time and have 0 mobility options, so gaining haste after using their power makes sense because, like I said before, there is a risk to it. The killer is standing completely still using their power, which allows survivors the time to run to another tile and make distance. Like when twins were getting their rework, one of the changes I most liked was getting haste to go pick up the survivor you downed, and it would disable if you tried using that haste to attack someone. All this did was make one of the most boring and time-consuming parts of the twins, having to run across the map to pick up a survivor, less time-consuming. But basically everything involving that rework got erased from existence, so yeah. Instances where haste, however, is not warranted are cases like Skull Merchant, Huntress, and I hate to say it, but I have to be fair, Singularity. Singularity has the family photo add-on, which all Singularity players, me included, know how good this add-on is, and it genuinely makes Singularity feel like an entirely different character without it. However, it still is really stupid because Singularity gets to teleport on top of Survivor, gain 50% action speed, and then gain haste. It's just a 3-in-1 deal, and as much as I love this add-on, it's still really stupid. It shouldn't really be in the game, even if it is one of his best add-ons and makes him feel actually fun to play. Skull Merchant is an obvious case because she already has the entire smorgasbord of status effects: blindness, hindered, oblivious, exhaust, broken, etc, etc. When a survivor is scanned and marked on her radar, she gains stacking haste, meaning that mid-chase another teammate can inadvertently make your chase worse by accidentally stepping into a drone. Something that's not even your fault will make her even stronger against you. She also applies Hinder too, making the speed gap between the two players even wider, which again is really dumb. She only got this haste in her pre-rework state because back then she didn't apply Hindered like she does now, and she had zero chase potential back then, so they decided to give her haste to be an actual threat in chase. But now that she's a trapping killer that can do good in chase with her drone spamming Hindered, that's where it becomes a problem. If she only had haste or hindered, then it would be fine, it would be somewhat more acceptable, but the fact that she gets both is what makes her incredibly annoying. And like I mentioned earlier, the Huntress got haste add-ons, which is just incredibly confusing. Out of all the things Huntress needed, haste isn't even close to being to the top of the list. It's not even like halfway down the list. Haste isn't even something anyone considered for the Huntress, but Behavior didn't know what to do, so they just slap Hindered onto it. And this leads to the biggest issue. Whenever Behavior doesn't know what to do with something, they'll just slap Haste onto it. Skull Merchant has no map presence or chase potential. Give her Haste. The FOV slider is now in the game, so what should we do with Shadowborn? Obviously, give it Haste when you're blinded. Huntress's max hatchet add-ons need to go, but what do we replace it with? Obviously more haste. That subscribe button isn't clicked. What should you do? Obviously you should click it. But then there are confusing instances of haste, like when it's literally an entire killer's kit. Clown's entire kit is all about controlling the speed of a chase by applying Hindered and Haste, but I guess it's fine because, well, he has a limited amount of bottles that then need to be reloaded, so I'd say maybe it's okay, but I know he isn't exactly a fan favorite to go against because he just throws a pink bottle and wins loops. Hindered is a much more rare status effect, and it is only on a handful of perks and abilities compared to Haste. You have Forced Hesitation, Champion of Light, and Cryo Trap, like that's basically it. Or for powers, usually it's only a secondary effect, like on Unknown's Projectile, Nemesis's Whip, which is the worst fucking form of Hindered in the entire game. It is horrible. If you removed it, nothing would change. Or Wesker fully infecting someone. Only two killers really use Hindered as a main part of their kit, and that's Freddy and Clown. Well, I guess that would be two clowns. I feel like the biggest problem with Haste is just, well, how easy it is becoming to activate it sometimes. With perks like Rapid Brutality or Unbound, hitting survivors is part of the main gameplay loop, and like I said with Hope, further rewards you winning, letting you snowball your chase faster. Like, Rapid Brutality's downside is supposed to be that you can't get Bloodlust anymore, right? But every killer who uses this perk never gets Bloodlust in the first place because of how often they use their power, like Clown, Spirit, or Pinhead. With how often you're pressing M2 and using your ability, you just don't get Bloodlust in the first place. Or with Unbound, if you pair it with Bamboozle, you can just get through a window and be faster for 10 seconds on command, all for hitting a survivor. I feel like Haste should always have a high risk to it or an actual decent requirement for it to activate, like Play With Your Food, because like I said with Play With Your Food, you actually have to spend time building up your stacks, which you can then quickly lose 2 or all your stacks in one chase. Then you get stupid forms of Haste like Shadowborn, which doesn't even make sense. Like, why would you ever run this perk? If you hate being blinded, why not run Lightborn to completely counter it? If you run Lightborn, you'll be completely immune to being blinded and get aura reading, but with Shadowborn, you just gain haste, so you can run into a wall at a faster speed. Though a big issue with Haste is like what I mentioned a long time ago in my made for this video. That is that Dead by Daylight maps are not designed with the idea that everyone will be moving faster than their base speeds. When you're designing a map, you're doing it based on the average normal speed of a survivor, that being 4 meters a second, and killers moving at 4.6 meters a second. With this in mind, you can design the map in loops, the distance between them, if it's too short or too long, or how strong a loop is, how many rotations around it you can make. Suddenly, however, if survivors have tools to start moving at 105 or 110 107% movement speed randomly, or the killer can just suddenly become 120 or 125% movement speed, that's where things start to break, because the maps aren't, calculated and designed for this in mind. The game really isn't meant to have 20 different ways to obtain haste, because if one side brings haste and the other doesn't, the changes become exponentially harder. I mean, back in the old Hope and Made for This days, if you paired those two together and literally any other form of haste, you would begin moving faster than the killer. They couldn't win, they couldn't catch you. Any instance of haste, from 2% to 7%, anything, is a huge change on how everything is played because the game isn't designed around it. So overall, haste is slowly becoming more and more prevalent when it really shouldn't be. Haste needs to be super well regulated, or else we might enter a haste meta where killers start moving at 130% movement speed and downing survivors before they can even make it to a loop. I don't really have anything else to say other than take care of yourselves and have a damn good one. Peace.